Carl Jung identified 8 signs of an exceptionally rare personality type, and if you recognize even 4 of them in yourself, you may belong to what I call the psychological elite. Through decades of research, Jung explored a level of awareness he described as differentiated consciousness, a unique way of perceiving reality that most people never develop. But here's where things get truly fascinating. These uncommon individuals often go through life believing that something about them is fundamentally wrong. Jung encountered countless people with remarkable psychological depth who had been taught to see their intensity, heightened sensitivity, and unwillingness to settle for superficial answers as personal weaknesses instead of signs of extraordinary mental complexity. But the most surprising discovery was this. Jung believed these rare personalities weren't simply different. They represented a more highly developed stage of psychological evolution. They represent humanity's next stage of consciousness development. Join me as we descend into the depths of Jungian psychology to uncover these 8 definitive signs of rare personality types. If you recognize yourself in these patterns, everything you've been told about being too much will finally make sense, because you're not too much for the world. The world may simply be too small for the way your mind works. Because Jung uncovered something that much of modern psychology still struggles to recognize, the qualities that make you feel like an outsider aren't weaknesses. They may be signs of advanced psychological development. You're not broken, you're becoming something more. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But what if who you truly are doesn't fit into society's narrow definitions of normal? What if your intensity, your depth, your refusal to settle for surface-level existence are evidence of what I call advanced psychological architecture?" Think about this from an evolutionary perspective. Throughout history, the people who changed the course of humanity were often those who refused to blindly accept the world as it was. They questioned established beliefs, experienced life with unusual depth, and envisioned possibilities that others couldn't yet see. But here's the tragic irony. Society teaches these exceptional individuals to suppress their greatest strengths. You've probably been told you're too sensitive, too intense, or too complicated. But Jung understood that these supposed flaws are actually signs of what he called psychological differentiation. The rare ability to perceive and process reality at levels most people never develop. Modern neuroscience is beginning to echo some of Jung's ideas. Research on highly sensitive people suggests that roughly 20% of the population processes sensory and emotional information more deeply than average. But Jung pointed towards something far rarer: individuals whose entire psychological system functions with an unusually high level of awareness and complexity. And yet, that still isn't the most extraordinary part. The most remarkable part is that these uncommon personalities often conceal their natural abilities because they've been conditioned to view them as weaknesses or burdens. You've learned to make yourself smaller because your depth can make others uncomfortable. Now, let me show you the first sign of what I call psychological rarity. Sign 1. You experience emotional depth that feels almost supernatural. Carl Jung observed something fascinating about intense emotional experiences. Some individuals don't simply experience emotions on the surface. They encounter what he described as affect-toned complexes, where feelings become deeply connected to memories, meanings, and unconscious patterns. You don't just feel emotions. You experience them with extraordinary depth, as though every feeling carries multiple layers of meaning that others may never notice. Here's what Jung realized that most therapists miss. This isn't emotional instability, it's emotional sophistication. When you feel deeply, you're not overreacting. You're accessing what Jung called the objective psyche, layers of human experience that most people have learned to suppress. You can sense the unspoken tension in a room before anyone says a word. You pick up on the emotional currents beneath every interaction because your mind is tuned to depth rather than superficial pleasantries. Jung believed that what irritates us about others can reveal something about ourselves. But for you, those subtle reactions can become windows into patterns and meanings that most people never notice. Sign 2. You question reality with what I call sacred curiosity. According to Jung, many people move through life largely unconsciously, following social expectations and inherited beliefs without ever questioning them. But you have an instinct to look beneath the surface and search for deeper meaning. Jung might describe this as a highly active thinking function, one that refuses to settle for easy explanations and constantly seeks to understand what lies beneath them. You don't just ask what, you ask why. Why do people stay in relationships that diminish them? Why do we accept systems that don't serve human flourishing? Why do we pretend that shallow conversations constitute meaningful connection? Jung called this the transcendent function, the psychological ability to see beyond current limitations. While others accept the status quo, you're already envisioning what could be different, what could be more authentic, what could honor the full spectrum of human potential. But here's what I've discovered about people like you. Your questions threaten others' comfortable illusions. When you ask profound questions, you're not simply looking for answers. You're challenging the beliefs and psychological defenses that allow people to remain comfortable within their limitations. If you've ever been told that you overthink, question too much, or look deeper than necessary, comment, "My curiosity is sacred." Sign 3. You've developed what I call conscious independence. Carl Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." You've learned to do exactly this, not by choice, but by psychological necessity. According to Jung's research, rare personalities often develop what he called individuated consciousness earlier than others, usually through adversity. Here's what Jung understood that most people miss. Your independence isn't a defensive mechanism, it's an achievement. You've learned through experience that depending on others for your sense of worth is psychological quicksand, so you built yourself from the ground up. You stood up, often alone, and created an identity that couldn't be taken away by someone else's opinion or absence. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the psychological journey toward becoming whole. Most people never complete this journey because it requires facing what Jung termed the shadow, all the parts of yourself you've been taught to reject. Your solitude isn't loneliness, it's sanctuary. It's where you remember who you are beneath all the roles and expectations. Jung believed this self-knowledge is the foundation of all psychological health. Sign 4. You possess what I call hyper-perceptive awareness. Carl Jung transformed psychology by recognizing intuition as a genuine psychological function rather than simply a vague feeling. He described intuition as a form of unconscious perception, an ability that can suddenly reveal ideas, possibilities, hidden connections, or solutions to situations that conscious reasoning alone may struggle to resolve. You don't simply observe people, you pick up on the subtle patterns behind their behavior. You notice fleeting expressions, shifts in mood, changes in tone, and even what remains unspoken. Jung might have connected this heightened awareness to his broader ideas about the unconscious and active imagination, the capacity to explore meanings and possibilities beyond what is immediately visible. When someone says they're fine, but their entire energetic field screams distress, you can't unsee it. When there's tension in a room that everyone else seems to ignore, you feel it in your bones. This isn't paranoia, it's psychological sensitivity operating at a level that most people never develop. But Jung warned that if you don't learn to protect this sensitivity, it will exhaust you. You end up becoming an unconscious therapist for everyone around you, regulating conversations and carrying pain that isn't yours to carry. Sign 5. You crave meaning over everything else. Carl Jung observed, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But what if being true to yourself means rejecting everything society tells you to want? Jung discovered that certain personalities are psychologically incapable of living inauthentic lives. You don't choose meaning over popularity, your psyche demands it. You've probably tried living for external validation, following scripts, playing expected roles. But Jung would have recognized the symptoms immediately, that gnawing emptiness, that sense of betraying something essential, that quiet desperation beneath any applause. According to Jung, when you live against your psychological type, you don't just feel uncomfortable, you develop what he called neurotic symptoms. Your psyche literally rebels against inauthenticity. You can't force yourself to care about shallow ambitions or meaningless achievements. Success without purpose doesn't excite you, and relationships built purely on convenience never feel truly fulfilling. Your inner psychology demands something deeper: authenticity, meaning, and genuine connection. But Carl Jung identified something remarkable about people who prioritize meaning. They become what I call evolutionary catalysts for human consciousness. When you refuse to settle for less than authentic connection, you force others to confront their own inauthenticity. Sign 6. You've outgrown people and environments repeatedly. Carl Jung suggested that one of the deepest tragedies within a family is the life a parent never had the courage to live. But what happens when you decide not to repeat that pattern? Jung recognized that true psychological growth often requires stepping away from inherited expectations and walking a path that can feel deeply solitary. You may have experienced the painful moment when people who once understood you no longer seem to recognize who you've become. Not because you've become cold or difficult, but because you've released old patterns, expectations, and conditioning that no longer fit the person you're becoming. Jung described this kind of transformation as a form of psychological death and rebirth. The friends who knew you when you were shrinking, when you were people-pleasing, when you were suppressing your truth, they remember that version of you. Sometimes they want that version back because it felt safer, more predictable, but you can't go back. Jung understood that psychological evolution is irreversible. Once you've seen behind the curtain of social conditioning, you can't return to unconscious conformity. If people seem uncomfortable with your growth and keep asking you to be who you used to be, comment, "My evolution is not negotiable." Sign 7. You create what I call transformational presence. Carl Jung compared the meeting of two personalities to the interaction of two chemical substances when they come into contact. Both can be changed. But what if your presence alone has the power to create transformation because you refuse to hide behind a false version of yourself? When you show up with genuine authenticity, people may be forced to confront parts of themselves they normally keep hidden. Jung recognized a rare quality in certain individuals: the ability to create a psychological space where others feel genuinely safe to be themselves. When people talk to you, they feel understood in a way that is uncommon. You don't simply hear their words, you sense the emotions and struggles beneath them. Instead of offering quick solutions, you give them your full presence. Rather than judging or interrupting, you allow them the space to uncover and express what is truly within them. Jung understood that this kind of deep presence can itself become a powerful form of psychological healing. But there's a hidden cost to having this gift. People who are deeply attuned to others can drain themselves by constantly giving without ever receiving the same level of understanding in return. You become so accustomed to being the person who holds space for everyone else that you forget that you also deserve someone who can hold space for you. Jung recognized that highly empathetic individuals can fall into patterns of unconscious self-sacrifice, always rescuing, supporting, and carrying the emotional weight of others. The goal isn't to become less caring, it's to develop discernment, to know who deserves your energy, when to give it, and when to protect it. Sign 8. You sense a purpose that can't be defined yet. Carl Jung said, "Your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." If you feel a persistent sense that you're meant for something more than the ordinary, Jung would have recognized this as what he called the transcendent function, your psyche's drive toward individuation and purpose. You can feel it. That persistent inner sense that you're meant to create something, contribute something, or bring something meaningful into the world. You may not know exactly what it is yet, but the feeling refuses to disappear. Jung saw this as the creative potential within us, seeking a way to express itself. It isn't about fame, status, or recognition. It's about alignment, the deep psychological need to live in harmony with who you truly are. Jung found that people who ignore this calling often develop neurotic symptoms, anxiety, depression, a sense of meaninglessness. But here's Jung's most profound insight about purpose-driven personalities. Your calling isn't just personal, it's transpersonal. You're not just here to fulfill yourself, you're here to serve the evolution of consciousness itself. Jung spent his entire career studying personalities like yours. He called people with these traits what I term the differentiated individuals, those who have developed psychological complexity that allows them to see, feel, and understand at levels most people never reach. But Jung also identified the stages of development for rare personalities. Understanding where you are in this process is crucial for your continued growth. Stage 1. The unconscious outsider. You sense that you're different, but you can't quite explain what makes you so different. You notice these qualities within yourself, yet instead of seeing them as strengths to develop, you treat them as flaws that need to be corrected. So you try to blend in, follow the crowd, and become what everyone considers normal. But maintaining that false version of yourself comes with a heavy psychological cost. Jung observed that people caught in this pattern can develop a rigid persona, becoming so committed to appearing acceptable that they gradually lose connection with who they truly are. Stage 2. The awakening individual. You begin to see your unique traits not as flaws, but as qualities that can be developed and used with purpose. You start exploring Jung's ideas about psychological types and gaining a clearer understanding of your own nature. Then comes the deeper work of shadow integration, embracing the parts of yourself you were once taught to hide or reject. This is the point where you stop apologizing for your depth and begin to own it. You set stronger boundaries with people who constantly try to diminish you, and you begin surrounding yourself with those who can meet you with the same level of honesty, depth, and authenticity. Stage 3. The individuated consciousness. You've fully integrated your rare traits into a coherent identity. You understand your purpose and live it consciously. You've developed what Jung called psychological wholeness, the ability to be authentically yourself while remaining connected to others. At this stage, you become what I call a beacon for other rare souls. You don't just live authentically, you give others permission to do the same. You become a catalyst for collective consciousness evolution. If you're ready to stop hiding your rare traits and start owning them completely, comment, "I am psychologically rare and proud." But Jung warned of something essential that many people with uncommon psychological traits fail to understand. You must integrate your shadow, or the very qualities that make you exceptional can eventually become your greatest limitation. What does that mean? Even people with remarkable self-awareness still have unconscious patterns capable of undermining their growth. Jung identified several shadow tendencies that can emerge in individuals who possess unusually deep psychological awareness. The superiority complex. Shadow. You begin to see your rarity as evidence that you're better than others rather than simply different. This leads to isolation and arrogance. The messianic shadow. You become convinced that it's your job to wake up or heal everyone around you. This leads to burnout and resentment when others don't appreciate your efforts. The martyrdom shadow. You begin to believe that being rare means being destined to suffer, that your depth requires sacrifice of happiness or connection. Jung believed that integrating the shadow is a crucial part of becoming psychologically whole. The objective isn't to erase your darker tendencies, but to bring them into conscious awareness so they no longer influence your actions without your knowledge. True psychological maturity means knowing when to share your strengths and when to protect your energy, when to step forward and lead, and when to step back, when to speak your truth, and when silence is the wiser choice. Jung made a profound observation about uncommon personalities and relationships. They can often attract people who want to control or possess what makes them unique, while also drawing others who feel threatened by their intensity and independence. Recognizing this pattern is essential if you want to build relationships based on genuine connection rather than control, insecurity, or competition. The light seekers. These are people who are naturally drawn to your energy but haven't yet done the inner work themselves. They may turn to you as their therapist, mentor, or source of direction, depending on your strength and wisdom to fill what they haven't developed within themselves. They admire what you bring into their lives, but they may not always appreciate you as a whole person beyond the gifts you provide. The light dimmer. These are people who feel threatened by your intensity and constantly try to get you to tone down, be more reasonable, or stop making everything so complicated. They're often unconsciously triggered by your authenticity because it highlights their own inauthenticity, the light matcher. These are the rare individuals who have done their own psychological work and can meet you at your level of depth without needing to consume or diminish you. They celebrate your rarity while maintaining their own psychological sovereignty. Jung discovered something remarkable about people with rare psychological depth who learn to navigate relationships consciously. They can become mirrors that help others recognize their own potential for growth and transformation. But the key is developing what Jung called psychological discrimination, the ability to recognize who is capable of genuine, mutual connection and who is approaching you because they want something from you. But here's what Jung understood: that change is everything. With psychological rarity comes responsibility. You're not just different for your own benefit, you're different in service of human evolution. Jung believed that individuals with rare personalities serve as bridges between the unconscious and conscious realms of human experience. Through your depth, your questions, your refusal to accept shallow answers, you help humanity grow. This is why ordinary connections never feel like enough for you. It's why shallow relationships leave you feeling empty, and why you'd rather walk alone than pretend to be someone you're not. Something within you demands deeper work, a life built on authenticity, meaning, and the courage to face yourself honestly. But Jung also warned about what can be called psychological inflation, the danger of mistaking rarity for superiority. Having unusual psychological traits doesn't make you more valuable than everyone else. It simply comes with greater responsibility for how you use them. The real challenge is learning to hold both confidence and humility at the same time, to recognize your uniqueness without ever believing that it makes others less worthy. Your sensitivity isn't a weakness to be managed. It's intelligence to be applied. Your intensity isn't too much. It's exactly what certain situations require. Your refusal to settle isn't difficult. It's necessary for the evolution of consciousness. Jung proposed a striking idea about psychologically uncommon individuals. As humanity develops greater self-awareness, traits that seem rare today may gradually become more widespread. But that doesn't mean you're simply unusual. It may mean you're exploring ways of thinking and living that could become more familiar to others in the future. In Jungian terms, you can think of this as standing at the leading edge of psychological development, discovering paths that others may eventually learn to walk themselves. This perspective changes everything about how you see your struggles. Every time you felt like an outsider, you were actually scouting new territory for human potential. Every time you've been criticized for being too much, you were demonstrating possibilities that threaten limited worldviews. Every time you've chosen authenticity over acceptance, you've expanded what's possible for human relationship. Every time you've refused to settle for shallow meaning, you've raised the bar for what life can become. Jung understood that psychological evolution happens through individuals like you who refuse to accept current limitations as permanent. You're not just living your life, you're expanding what it means to be human. But this comes with loneliness. You're often walking paths that few others have walked. You're solving problems that most people don't even recognize as problems. You're seeking connections that most people don't believe are possible. Jung's final insight about uncommon personalities was both challenging and freeing. You must learn to embrace what makes you different without depending on others to understand or validate it. The goal isn't to convince everyone that you're special. It's to embody your strength so completely that your life becomes an example of what's possible when a person fully accepts and lives according to their authentic nature. This means making peace with the fact that not everyone will understand your depth. Some people will feel challenged by the questions you ask, while others may try to diminish you because your authenticity forces them to confront parts of themselves they haven't faced. But Jung recognized something powerful about those who fully embrace their psychological uniqueness. They naturally attract people who are also ready to accept and express who they truly are. You don't need everyone to understand you. What matters is finding the few people who can meet you at your level of depth and awareness, then building meaningful connections with them. The world needs your curiosity, sensitivity, and willingness to challenge limitations, but these gifts must be shared with intention, wisdom, and balance. Learn when to open yourself and when to protect your energy, when to be powerful and when to be discerning. Jung wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." You're learning to do exactly that, and in doing so, you're giving others permission to accept themselves completely too. Remember what Jung observed about exceptionally uncommon personalities. The 8 signs we've explored aren't merely isolated traits, they can be seen as expressions of a deeper psychological structure. Jung wrote that one of life's greatest privileges is becoming who you truly are. For someone with unusual depth, that journey means embracing your authentic nature and recognizing that your way of experiencing the world may be more complex than what many people are accustomed to. Your emotional depth isn't simply oversensitivity, it can reflect a heightened capacity for understanding emotions. Your constant questioning isn't negativity, it's a mind that refuses to accept limitations without examining them. Your independence isn't necessarily isolation, it can be a form of psychological self-reliance. Your heightened awareness isn't paranoia, it can reflect a strong sensitivity to subtle patterns and signals. Your desire for meaning isn't impractical, it's the need to live in alignment with what truly matters to you. The people you outgrow aren't proof that you're cold. Sometimes, growth simply changes the relationships that once fit your life. Your ability to influence others isn't manipulation when it comes from genuine authenticity and respect. And if your purpose still feels undefined, that doesn't mean you're lost. It may simply mean your potential is still searching for the right way to express itself. If even half of these signs resonate with you, it may mean you're not simply different. You may have a deeper capacity for self-awareness and psychological growth. In Jungian terms, people who question deeply, seek authenticity, and pursue greater consciousness can help move themselves and others toward a more meaningful way of living. Yes, it's lonely sometimes. Yes, it requires more courage than most people will ever need. But Jung believed that people like you are essential for humanity's psychological evolution. Your intensity isn't too much. It's exactly what the world needs to shake off its comfortable numbness. Your sensitivity isn't weakness. It's strength that can perceive what others miss. Your refusal to settle isn't difficult. It's necessary for progress. Carl Jung devoted much of his life to understanding people with unusual psychological depth because he recognized something profound. Their journey isn't only about personal transformation, it can also expand our understanding of what it means to be human. You don't need to make yourself smaller, quieter, or more acceptable just to fit someone else's expectations. The real challenge is to embrace your individuality with self-awareness, humility, and courage, and become fully who you are. If you're ready to embrace your psychological uniqueness and stop apologizing for the qualities that make you different, leave a comment. I am evolving into my highest consciousness. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that their depth, individuality, and authenticity are worth embracing. And if you want to explore more of Jung's ideas about the darker side of sensitivity, watch my video, Final Warning to Empaths. They're feeding on your light. In it, I dive deeper into the disturbing patterns that can emerge when emotionally sensitive people become entangled with those who unconsciously depend on their energy, attention, and emotional strength. Subscribe, because we're only beginning to uncover the deeper forces that make you extraordinary. Remember, you're not too much. The world may simply be too small for everything you're capable of becoming. Jung understood that people who embrace their depth, question what others accept, and live authentically can help expand the way we see ourselves and the world. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next dimension.